Hello and welcome to Beyond the Broadcast. My name is Seth Resler and I am the community building consultant for Paragon. And this is a series of discussions that we have put together for public media, both public radio and public television. And our goal here is to explore and better understand the world of community building, and specifically to start thinking about how public media can put community building concepts into practice. In future Beyond the Broadcast discussions, we're going to bring in folks from outside of public media, people who work in community building and are doing that in other spaces. I'm a big fan, big proponent of bringing in people from outside the industry. Frankly, I think in the radio industry, we have a tendency to talk to other radio stations too much, to constantly be asking what are other radio stations doing or what are other television stations doing. And I think we would benefit from looking at what people in other industries are doing. So that is coming in future Beyond the Broadcast discussions. But today, it's just me. And today, our topic is 5 factors to consider before selecting a community to build. But before we get to that, I do want to talk a little bit about what we've covered in our previous discussions. This is our third Beyond the Broadcast discussion. And in earlier discussions, we have talked about the fact that the big change that came to the media industry, and not just public media, all media, whether it's radio, television, film, newspapers, you name it, the big change is not what we thought it was. There was an assumption on the part of a lot of people that the big change was simply the way we deliver our content. That, we used to deliver our audio content through AM and now we deliver it through FM and now we have to move to streaming. Or we used to deliver our video content over the airwaves and then we delivered it through cable and now we need to deliver it through a streaming app. And yes, that is a change. Content does need to be delivered digitally now, but that is not the big change. No, the big change is this, that the barrier to entry to the media industry has been obliterated. That when I started my career in media, if you wanted to create content and disseminate it to the masses, you needed big expensive equipment like a radio tower or a television studio or a printing press, and you needed people who knew how to do that. They had specialized technical knowledge. You don't need that anymore. Anybody with a cell phone and an internet connection can create content and send it around the world. And that is what is having a huge impact, not just on public media and its finances, but on all media. That we have media companies whose revenue model was built in a time when it was hard to create content, and so content was scarce. And content isn't scarce anymore. Now, content is abundant. And unless your revenue model assumes that content is abundant, you're going to be in trouble. And so that is one of the reasons why we need to talk about what comes after content. Because everybody can create content now, so what else can we provide? What does public media need to do that falls within its mission? And the argument that we are making with these Beyond the Broadcast discussions is that the thing that comes after content is community. That public media can play a vital role in building community. And what we're really talking about when we talk about building community is creating spaces, both impersonal and digital, where people can come together and can connect with one another. That's really what this Beyond the Broadcast series is all about. It's all about how can we create spaces for our listeners to come together and to connect with one another. And so what we're going to talk about in today's discussion is exactly how to do this, because you see, radio stations and television stations have broad audiences with a lot of diverse interests. And so it's not like there's just going to be one community that is the same as the audience. We talked last time in our last discussion about how communities and audiences are not the same thing. And so what you need to do if you want to set out to build a community is look at your audience and decide which pieces of your audience are going to make a great community that you can build. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's discussion. Okay, so I want to make that clear right off the top. It is not going to be we take your whole audience and we just turn it into a community. It's going to be we have this huge audience with lots of diverse interests, and we can select multiple communities from that or build multiple communities from that. And where do we start? Where is the first place to start? And so let's get into the first question that we should consider when we are looking to build a community from our audience. And that is this: does this group that we are looking at have a shared mission? In our last Beyond the Broadcast discussion, we talked about how a community is a group of people who have a shared mission and that they are connected over that mission. So the first thing you've got to do is figure out, do you have a group of people in your audience who all have a shared mission? And it could be any number of things. Maybe they are woodworking aficionados and they all want to learn how to become better woodworkers. Maybe they all enjoy local wines or craft beer. Maybe they're foodies. Maybe they're brand new parents. Maybe they're automobile enthusiasts. It could be any number of things. But the first thing you want to think about is, what is that shared mission and how compelling is that shared mission? Is that shared mission something that's going to really draw them together? Do they want to connect with other people who have the same shared mission? Now, I'll give you an example, and this is an example that I have used before. I go to the Podcast Movement Conference every year, and I'm sure many of you go as well. And this is a group of people who have a shared mission. They are all podcasters looking to become better podcasters by learning from one another. So they have an interest in connecting and talking and forming relationships with each other around their shared mission. So the first thing you want to do is really find that shared mission. Keep in mind, just because people have a shared interest, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a shared mission. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I am very interested in listening to podcasts, but I'm not necessarily interested in connecting with other podcast listeners just because they're podcast listeners. But I also create podcasts, and I am interested in connecting with other podcast creators. So I have a much stronger interest in the shared mission of creating podcasts than I do in the shared mission of consuming podcasts. So I really want you to think about that. Not only what is the shared interest, but do people really want to connect with other people who share that interest? And how strong is that connection? If you created a space, would they all be dying to get into it so they can connect with each other? Or are they kind of ho-hum about it? And with that, let's get to the second factor that we want to consider. Does a space already exist for the people with this shared mission? And we talked about this a little bit in the last discussion that we had. We talked about the difference between community building and community engagement or community outreach. And essentially, the idea is this, that when you set out to build a community, what you are doing is creating a space and getting people to gather in that space and connect with each other. But sometimes there's already a space for people with a shared mission to connect. And so you don't need to create a brand new one. All you need to do is go engage with them or reach out to them in the space that already exists. So the second factor that we've got to consider is there already a space there? Do we actually need to create a new one? If there is already a space there, is there something that you and your radio station or your television station can add by creating a new space? Is there some reason why that's going to be better and it's going to supply something that isn't already there? Or would you be better off just engaging with people in the space that already exists? So I want you to think about that. So let's now move on to the next factor that we want to consider when we are thinking about the community that we want to build. And the next question is this: are we the right people to build this space? And I think this is really important because I think you need to have credibility in the space that you are trying to build. So one way to think about it is this: if you were not the one building this community, if it weren't your station building this community, would you be a member? And if not, then maybe this isn't the right community. So for example, I'm probably not the person to start a community for Harley-Davidson motorcycle riders because I don't ride a Harley-Davidson motorcycle myself. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense. Now, this can become a sensitive issue if you are thinking about building a community along demographic lines. For example, building a community along certain racial or cultural or even sexual orientation lines. You do want to think about this question: are you the right person to build that community? And if you do not have authentic representatives from that community, you may not be the right person to build that community. It doesn't mean that you couldn't partner with another organization or engage with those types of communities, but are you the right person to build it? Now, there's a flip side to this as well, which is that if you are only building communities for people that you are an authentic representation of, and you're limited in what you're an authentic representation of, well, then you're going to be limited in the types of communities that you can produce. I'm a white man, and if I only produce communities for white men, then all we wind up with are communities for white men, and that's problematic as well. So I'm not saying that there's any one right or wrong answer here. I think this is something that you're going to want to think about very carefully, have internal discussions about, and decide what is the right thing to do in your particular situation. So let's move on to the fourth thing that you want to consider as you're thinking about what community you want to build. And that's this. Can we reach our potential community members? Can we reach the people who will want to participate in this community? Now, obviously, public media wants to grow its audience. It wants to reach new audiences. It wants to reach younger audiences. It wants to engage with new demographics. And that's a very important and very laudable goal. But when it comes time to building your first community, and probably your second and your third community, until you are practiced at this, I would start with the people that you already know that you can reach. So look at your audience and look at who's already there and figure out how to build a community with the folks that you can already get to. Down the road, you may decide that you want to use community building as a way to engage with new types of people and new folks that you aren't currently reaching. But for right now, look at who you know you can already reach. Who is in your email database? Who is already listening to or watching your station, who is following you on social media, who is engaging with you on a regular basis, and who's giving money to you. Think about all of those things as you start to plan your first community. The fifth factor to consider is this. Can we monetize this space? Now look, when you get into the world of community building, you will often run into community managers and other community professionals who are very hesitant to talk about revenue generation when it comes to community. And the reason for that is understandable. That community at the end of the day is about creating authentic relationships between people. And when you start to introduce financial transactions as part of that, it can have a negative impact on the way people view those relationships. So it's completely understandable. And we are talking about public media where the goal is not just a purely capitalistic, profit-driven motive. We all have missions to consider, and it's very important that we uphold those missions and that everything that we're doing in the community building realm is part of that mission. However, we also have financial realities that we need to deal with. Public media is also under a lot of financial pressure these days and needs to come up with new streams of revenue. And frankly, I think it is perfectly okay to think about community building in that way. It is a service that you are providing. You are providing people with something that they need, and it takes money to provide that. So I do think it is okay to think about this as a way to generate revenue, but I think you got to be smart about it. And so you've got to be thinking about it from the very beginning. Now, at the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways that you can monetize a community, but really it boils down to just two groups of people that you can go to and ask for money when it's related to the community. The first is the members, the people who are actually participating in the community. And there's a number of different ways that you can generate revenue from those members. You can ticket events, you can put the community behind a paywall or ask for a subscription, you can ask them for donations, you can try and upsell them to other products or services. There's a number of different ways, but that is one group of people that you can go to try and generate revenue. The other group of people that you can go to try and generate revenue is basically people or organizations that want access to your members. And essentially what we're talking about here is sponsors, people who are going to pay to be in the same room or in the same space as your members because they have some reason why they want to connect with them. So that wraps up our discussion about the 5 factors you should consider when deciding what community to build from your audience. I hope that this gives you some clarity, gives you some things to think about, gives you some guidance, and gives you some ideas about what type of community your station could build. You probably have a ton of communities that you could build from your audience. And the question is, where do you start? And I hope that this will give you some good ideas about, where to begin when it comes to community building. Again, I am Seth Resler. I am the community building consultant for Paragon, and we are going to host more of these Beyond the Broadcast events. So if you are just watching the recording and you would like to join us in the future, we would love to have you. It's a great opportunity to not just consume the content, but to actually enter the space and connect with other public media broadcasters who are looking to build community. We will see you next time. Thanks so much.